Hey guys, welcome back to our restoration project. So today we're finally at a point where we can close this guy up and call this our final assembly on our 2.0 engine build. Pretty much all the major components, parts, and pieces are put into place. There are a couple of things we need to look at that I've installed that we didn't do video on, and caught a couple of things we need to take a look at. Other than that, we're just going to close this top guy up, put the air shrouding on, some carburation, spark plug, wire looms, and any last little bits and pieces, tin, remnants, anything we got to do to call this engine complete. After that, we are ready to lower it to the ground. So let's go ahead and dive in and see exactly what we need to do to get this thing complete. So getting started here, let's just take a quick peek around and see what we've got put into place so far before we start adding new pieces. So I've installed our cam feed lines, and I did have one issue with the oil line fittings as they go into the case. Let's take a look at that first. So one of the things I had to correct when I installed my oil feed lines are these oil line fittings. So it is quite easy to put these in backwards if you're not installing this whole assembly at the same time. One side of the fitting is going to be a blunt end, the other side is going to have a recess, and that will be for the oil line ferrule. If you're not putting it together, it won't be obvious. But it will become obvious if you put it in at a later date and you have this in backwards. The threads are identical on both ends, and actually at a glance it looks like this side should be the one threading into the case, but that is not the case. So you'll want to make a note of that if you're installing your oil line fittings separately from your oil lines. And then also that would be the same on this side. So one of those faux pas of doing videos over the past 7 years. Hopefully we haven't had too many of them, but we have had a few. And most of our tin is in place now and ready to go. And then we finally got our muffler strap screws resolved. So they ended up being 65 millimeters. Let's have a look at our fan shroud here. So this thing has an incredible amount of time restoring this. This is the original. It's been re-resined, POR 15, sanded, base coat, clear coat. I've thrown everything at this to try and bring it back to life. It was very dry, very brittle, but other than that, in pretty good shape. All our holes were still connected, they weren't broken, and it just needed a lot of attention. But I think we're pretty much there, and so at this point we're really slick inside and out. And so I'm thinking one performance thing we could do here that might help our airflow capability. So I'm using this graphene, and you can see the flow characteristics. I mean, that's just crazy. That's just amazing how that runs off. So the graphene works really good if you want something very slick and something to flow very well, whether it be air or water or oil, whatever. I have coated the inside of our fan housing and then also the entire underneath of our fan shroud, and I think that should last us quite some time and should give us some performance enhancement to some degree. Okay, let's just set this back a little bit very carefully. Okay, so I got the alternator pulled back here for a second. I put a mirror and a flashlight inside the front of the fan housing, and I didn't quite like the way the wires were resting up against this interior shrouding piece. What that guy is and what his function is, I have no idea. I did talk to Kurt at Classic Automotive Training School, and he said to definitely not run your wires through it. It is definitely something designed for the airflow dynamics of what's going on inside the shroud here, to run the wiring outside of that. So what I've done is rotated my alternator to clear that once we're settled into place there. Otherwise, you could rub through and have a problem down the road. You could have a short. You could start a fire. Anything's possible here. So depending on your alternator, whatever you're running here, good idea just to double check. You got plenty of clearance from anything sharp in there that could burn through. Okay, so we're sort of in place now. All our fasteners are in location and finger tight. And while I'm doing this, I'm setting my gaskets and insulators in place at the same time, because I just want to make sure we're not going to have any issues when we tighten this down. We have to move it one way or another, as Porsche doesn't give you any room for adjustment.
And then double checking before we get too far here. So I've got our shroud in place and trying to squeeze our air tubing in here really tight up against our oil line hose and trying to bend it to get into our shrouding. I think I can get it in there, but this is one of those things where it might actually be easier to thread it on here first, then put this into place. But then we may have the same issue down below. Either way, it's going to be really tight. All right, let's take a look at this guy here as I'm trying to roll it into place and save a little bit of a battle with this hosing, but you can just see how tight everything is. I got this oil line pressing right against the backside. Hosing, hose clamps, and oil line, these are all Porsche. So it's not going to get any better than that, but it's just amazing how tight everything is. There's just no room for adjustment, no room for clearance, nothing. It's got to be right on or it's not going. But I got to tell you, man, was that tight. And this screw in there, zoom in on that one, that little guy in there, you're probably going to need a 10 millimeter swivel socket to get that situated. And if you got big hands, yeah, you can forget it. There's no way. Everything's in the way there. You got your oil line in the way. You've got your hot air vent on top there up against your knuckles. It's a really tough spot. Now, let me go ahead and tighten all this up, and then we'll move on. So our spark plug kit is by Parts Classic, and a really nice spark plug kit all put together for us. Everything has been pre-sized, pre-crimped, and ready to install. And it looks like biggest to the smallest, 1 through 3, 4 through 6. So it should be fairly easy to put together and route. And depending on your car, some of the routing was a little bit different from year to year. I'm going to stick a couple of images in here of a 67 being put together in the factory, and that's what we're going to try and duplicate here with this kit. I think we can get pretty close, but the kit comes pretty complete with everything you're going to need. You got looms, wire holders, separators, everything you're going to need to put this together. And then also, this is our original Bosch distributor cap that I pulled off the car, and it looked to be fairly new condition at the time of disassembly, but outside was pretty crusty. So what I did is I cleaned it up really good and put a clear Cerakote finish on it, and that thing came back to life pretty good. So we're just going to go ahead and try to use this. Hopefully it works and we don't have any issues there. And so the other thing we'll need to do is disassemble these to some degree so that we can get them through our wire looms and get everything in place there. So we'll get these pulled off of here, grease them up, grease up our spark plug terminals, and get everything landed. And before we snap everything into place, you'll need to make sure your spark plug tips are removed. Okay, so after wrestling with these guys for about 3 hours, I think I finally got these plug wires to where I can make them work like our 67 photograph. Problem I'm running into is with these straight boots, the lengths that they've given me here are almost not enough to make this work out like I want it to work out. The alternate method, if I couldn't make this go, and if we can't make it go because I haven't finished the connections at the distributor, but for some reason we can't make them go, we'll have to go to the alternate method of routing, which is through the intake manifold there, and that'll clip the corner and get us a little bit more slack in the lines. One of the things I had to do is bend this loop here, this lollipop, several different directions to try and get it to work out for us. In the process there, I've kind of mutilated it. So I'm going to get one of those expressed out to us so I can wrap up these plug wires before I put these boots on at the distributor, and we can keep going here. So in the meantime, let's go ahead and move on to our intake manifolds and close this thing up with some carburation. Okay, so setting up our manifolds is really pretty easy. So it's going to be gasket, insulator, gasket, and I have special longer studs here to account for the insulator. And then installing our crossbar, so we're all greased up on our ball joints here. We're just going to get this in place before we tighten everything down. There's two styles of wave washers for manifolds and carburation. There's a thin, which is about a 1/2 millimeter thick, and a thick, which is a standard M8 washer, and that's about 3/4 of a millimeter. We're going to be using the thin 1/2 millimeter. Okay, so our manifolds are all put into place, and since then I have received our Express from Parts Classic Lollipop spark plug wire separator. Ordered a couple of them. They come straight. You can bend them and do whatever you need to do with them there, and that's going to work out just fine for there. So I went ahead and put the rest of the spark plug wires together, and this side here is really tight, putting all this together and trying to get this configuration. It does go, it will work, but it is a definite wrestling match. And the one downside I have to pre-packaged spark plug wire kits is when you're dealing with the point of the distributor, it really is best if they would just put the kit together, not put these boots on the ends, and then you have to fight with all the crimped end connections, take them all apart, put them back together. It really would just be better if they could send you a little bit longer wire, and then you can cut and trim those as you need to put them together. It'd be a whole lot more practical and a lot less risky. You really risk damaging these putting them together. But other than that, real nice looking kit. It's going to look just like our 67 photograph. So the next thing we need to do now is we need to measure across, depending on the order of your assembly. If you're following my order, this is not going to work. But they do recommend taking a straight edge from your manifolds across to the top points of our engine spring on both sides here. So we want to measure just to make sure that that spring is parallel. We're not going to be able to do that now because our heat tubing is in the way there of a straight edge. So I'm going to mount the carburetors, and then we'll take a straight edge across there and set that bar exactly level. Okay, so our spring is just snug. I can actually move this if I want to by hand. And then we're just going to take a straight edge across the carburetor body so that it's seated on the body. And then I'm measuring from here to here. And I'm coming up with 7 15/16 on each side after I adjust it in. Let's go ahead and take a look at the other side, and then we'll zoom in on that measurement. And then the same thing on this side. So we just want to make sure that we're straight over the top of this guy here, seated on our carburetor body, and straight up and down, and we can get that measurement. And then double checking our measurement just to make sure nothing has moved. Okay, and then our fan, I have not successfully been able to solve the rivet dilemma at this particular juncture. But I have solved it, and we are going to have these riveted in here. But for now, we're going to temporarily put this on the car because I have to get this engine installed and that car out of that booth for timing reasons and for weather reasons. It needs to come out of there ASAP. So we're temporarily going to go with this for starting up, testing, and tuning. I've used some locking hardware in there, a little bit of Loctite, and this type of a method I would recommend for a temporary solution only to fasten the hub, but I would not recommend this as a permanent solution to replacing your hub on your fan. But right now, let's just go ahead and go with it. That video will be coming down the road on the permanent solution, the permanent fix, and the balancing and everything you'll need to know about your alternator fan. Get our Woodruff key in place. And our fan belt, the arrows will be facing towards the engine. All right, so our fan belt in there, I don't see how this is possibly going to fit, but apparently this is the correct part number. I'm going to go with 4 shims. It just looks so tight in there. Start with 4 shims first and get our pulley in place here. And 2 shims on the outside. Alright, that's still too tight. I think I'm going to go 1 more in there. That'll be a total of 5 shims. And I'll keep a minimum of 2 shims out here. That still feels pretty tight. But I think we'll give this a try for startup. If we need some adjustment, we can deal with it at that time. And then we'll go ahead and snap our linkage into place, although we'll adjust this out at another time. Okay, so we're pretty much complete here and ready to install it into the car pretty much as it is. This is going to be the configuration. I'm going to lower it to the ground and hook it up to the transmission and slide it under the car. We're not going to have the air intake housing on top of this. But for the sake of aesthetics and an engine stand shot, let's just go ahead and mock up our air intake system and see what this thing looks like complete on an engine stand. And then also just sliding in our muffler tip just for aesthetics. And I will put that on permanently once we're installed into the car. I get the best angle. And then also we need to run the ceramic coating for a while to harden it up. I want to do that first before we pound that guy on there. Anyways, there she is in all her glory. 1967 Porsche 911 2.0. Well, I got to tell you, this is my first Porsche engine. Really impressed with the technology, and I can see why everybody is real excited about air-cooled technology. It's really kind of a fascinating technology and really interesting how everything works. The one thing I can say here as a first attempt at building a Porsche engine, definitely a right order to everything. If you're doing this yourself for the first time, you're probably going to have to do things over and over, take them off, put them back on, not the right order. Everything is just so tight. It's really unforgiving in its process. But eventually you can get through it. Definitely something you can do yourself. And another thing, guys, is if you need a professional Never be afraid to reach out to a professional. I've had many professionals involved in putting this thing together, and without their help, there'd be no way to get through this. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.